What that means is that I have oversight responsibility essentially for the PowerApps system. What you guys see is the UI, the engine, I have a pretty heavy hand in the flow system and a couple of other places. I've been asked to come out and talk to you guys today about our extensibility story, specifically around the underlying PowerApps platform. What does that mean? By show of hands, we're at the last day of the week. I just came in yesterday, so last day of the week. I imagine you guys have been beat over the head with PowerApps all week? Yes? Yes? Awesome. Cool. That's great. That was the plan. Have you guys seen anything beyond just the Canvas app, the surface of configuration of the Canvas app? Okay? No. Okay. And have you seen anything, there was one session that we did that had connectors and custom controls. Did you guys see that? Anybody not see that? Okay, so well, I'll touch on that as we move through. But what I'm going to talk about is quite a bit deeper, which is okay, you've scratched the surface of the UI, you've done some awesome stuff with the UI, you've gone to the next stage of now I need to really implement something and I need to integrate with things. I need to actually work with other things. And I want to be able to manipulate things using the Canvas, the Power App as the axle that you're spinning around. So first thing I'm going to touch on real quick, and I'm going to skip through this because typically I do this presentation in about an hour and a half, and I got 20 minutes. So I've cut a lot of stuff down, and I'm going to hit bullet points along the way. Now, we have a product suite called Microsoft Dynamics. Those of you that don't know it, where have you been? If you don't know it, Microsoft Dynamics has been expanding pretty extensively over the last year to 2.5 years. Lots of additional application components and capabilities that are being brought to life on it. One of the key things that we don't really talk a lot about is that Dynamics 365 is built on a platform. It's built on a common platform, most of it. There's actually 2 different platforms under the infrastructure right now. There will be one, but it's mostly built on one platform, and that platform is the Power Platform. Now that Power Platform enables things like the talent application, the CRM sales application, the service application, the insert your application here. Our internal vendors, our internal customers, and that's how we look at them, our internal customers build applications that they ship to you. In this case, through the process of buying something through the Office portal. We're making that available to you now as we progress through this by bringing the PowerApps brand out and allowing you to go to the new PowerApps portals and begin developing applications at the same level and capability state as our own internal applications. Okay? That's pretty unusual. We're literally opening the kimono up and bringing a lot of things that we used to do internally, we're bringing them into the open space and we're letting you guys start to work with them. We're going to touch on a little bit about that today. Now, the Power Platform enables a lot of capability with various other feature sets that we have within our infrastructure. The core capabilities are built around, in this case, business analytics based on the Power BI stack. There's a lot of native integration that's going on in the background, a lot of which we're going to start exposing to you guys over the next 6 to 12 months. We've been doing it now for over a year and a half, and it's now got to the point of maturity where it's now time to start bringing it out. Additionally, we've been dealing a lot with the Flow system. Who by show of hands uses Flow? Okay, as of end of this month, wait, we're still in September, right? End of next month, you will begin seeing Flow appear in the PowerApps CDS solutioning system. Okay, Flow is being used to replace the existing workflow system that we've had in the legacy CRM product for a number of years. That process has begun. That process actually has gone to the next stage. If you think of it as a 4-stage plan to take over the world, we're essentially on stage 2.5. And we've now begun moving the system into the infrastructure. That opens up a tremendous amount of capabilities and feature sets to you. And then, of course, we have the core Power Platform itself. By show of hands, who's been with us for the dynamic CRM lifecycle and heard of a term called XRM? Only one hand, awesome. So what is the Power Platform? What is PowerApps itself? At the end of the day, PowerApps is a couple of different pieces. Let's dive through and take a look at that. You have the PowerApps componentry itself, which is built out as essentially 3 different layers. You have a UX presentation layer, an engine, a data modeling and engine layer, and then you have an extensibility layer. There are 2 UX engines in the system today. The two UX engines are what we refer to as Canvas and Model today. What does it really mean? It means that the Canvas app is the componentry that we picked up from the PowerApps original effort. That's the old Project Sienna, the info path, all of that stuff. That's come forward into the Canvas app concept, which means it is literally you lay it out this way, it's always going to look this way, and a model concept that we brought in from the legacy CRM world, which is a mergeable form system. The ability for you to create a base and then have people extend your base. They're built two slightly different ways, but they will come together over time. And in fact, in a very short amount of time, you'll actually see Canvas components inside model forms and model forms inside Canvas components as one deployment package and one integrated package. That's happening actively. Why is that important? That handles those things that you want to deal with in a presentation tier. When you're building out a UI that's on top of the system and you want to deal with it, fantastic. The next tier down is our modeling tier. I'm not going to go too much into it. I typically go and talk about the modeling layer and a few other things. I'm just going to kind of scan over it. Don't have a lot of time. The modeling tier is a show of hands entity framework. More people for entity framework. The modeling tier is effectively a productized version of the entity framework. You go through and you define your model, your object, your related component. You define what the field types are, what the structures are, and whatnot, and we give you automatically a security model, a reporting model, an auditing model, a data storage model, an API. There's no work you have to do to get the API. It's just there, and it's interactive. That's in our modeling tier. And then we have our extensibility tier. Our extensibility tier has two primary angles today. There is the UI extensibility tier and the server-side extensibility tier. I'm going to be talking about the server-side extensibility tier primarily today. Just as a quick nod to the front-end extensibility tier, the front-end extensibility tier is primarily based on JavaScript or TypeScript that's used to manage and model the model-based applications. There's also an expression language that's part of the PowerApps, the Canvas app componentry tier, and then of course the custom connectors, which is a point at it, it models a connector, and then you can use that inside the expression language of PowerApps of the Canvas tier. The server-side extensibility is broken into a couple of other areas. One of the things I do want to point out is that the PowerApps platform, that underlying engine tier, we refer to as the Common Data Service. So by show of hands, who has heard of the Common Data Service? Bunch of folks, excellent. Who's heard of the Common Data Model? Okay, so the two are not the same. The Common Data Service is the engine and the runtime, the thing that makes it go. The Common Data Model is the definitions that we understand as Microsoft that lay in on top of that. That's a very important thing to understand. What it means is that Power BI wants to understand what an account is. Well, that's defined in the Common Data Model. There is no interpretation there. The Office team wants to understand how to address a contact. That's an understood object. And therefore, there's no integration work that you need to do. It just comes together. The Common Data Service brings the whole engine together, and it brings the engine to life. Now, that's all built on top of the Azure platform itself. The Azure platform is used to bring the runtime, the host, and a bunch of the other extensibility features to life. It's something that we've been spending a lot of time. We think about extensibility on the core CDS platform itself. It really progresses in a I can't say it, curve to more complex. The core concept of CDS and the PowerApps plan is that we want to entice both the business administrator to be able to develop and build a meaningful application, but we also want to walk all the way through to that governance aspect. Our extensibility model follows the same pattern. You have the concept of the application that is declarative, modelable, and business rules that sit on top of it, all built around the idea of declaration. Point, click, drag, here's my rule. Very similar to the way you think about a flow. Drag it together, stitch it together, go, with a little less capability. We also have the ability to manage and extend the application using a thing we call web resources and JavaScript. We've touched on that. And then we move into the developer layer, the actual guts, if you will. We target the developer layer towards the customer or the developer or the engineer who's having to do something that can't be addressed by these. Okay? Typically, A customer or a developer that is using just CDS for its engine, and this is a scenario we fully support. You built your own website, you built your own front end, you built your own capability, you just want to use our engine, usually works at about this layer. We actually have built it so that the API fully supports, you can call the API and business rules will run. It's not UI based. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. But when we get into the developer code layer, this is where we open the door to allow you to do deep and interesting things as far as integrating with the data in the system as well as outside the system. From an integration point of view, we're natively integrated to Azure, meaning we integrate into the service bus infrastructure, so the entire service bus suite of capabilities are available to you, as well as the webhook systems. Okay? We have an identity system that's built on AAD, which means you can create a token and call right back into our API. Our API is OData-based or SOAP-based if you choose to use our shipped APIs. And it is something that we use extensively in our own product. So for example, if you're using Talent, anybody seen the Talent application? They've had it on the floor. Talent application is a third-party, air quotes, shipped by Microsoft, application that's entirely built on Azure, hosted by Azure, and plumbed into CDS entirely through its API. It actually doesn't have a UI layer in CDS at all, but it's using it in the background. That makes it available to other CDS applications, CDS-based applications, to be able to consume it. Case in point, if you have project services using the scheduling system and you have customer service and you need to in turn schedule something through customer service, they're using the same scheduling module provided by a capability we refer to as the unified scheduling system. All right, so let's take kind of the look at the actual infrastructure and architecture of the system. At the end of the day, the CDS system is exposed primarily as a set of web services and extensibility points to you. How we actually deal with it on the back end, we federate it, we farm it, we actually hide that, entirely hide that. When you set this up, you're not going into your Azure portal, you're not going to Imbiza, you're not creating a subscription, you're not doing anything like that. You're going to Office or you're going to web.powerapps.com and you're saying, get me an account. And we manage everything at that point. We handle all the infrastructure, all the setup. Under the covers, you see us as a set of web services and a set of presentation tiers. Okay? Notice I use the term presentation tiers, plural. There are many presentation tiers for our platform. Through our web services layer, we have our pipelines. In this case, we have a thing we refer to as a plugin pipeline. You can think of this as a function. It's not, and we will actually see real functions here in a bit, but it isn't a function. It is actually a technology stack that's innate to our platform, but it serves the same functional goal as functions. It allows you to run a segment of code to do a specific job in response to a command or action. We allow you to develop your own APIs in the fact that you can define an API in our system and expose it through our web API. It is very straightforward and easy to use. Under the cover, we're handling all the security, the process logic, auditing, and control. All right, so let's drill on a little bit further. Our plugin pipeline looks in a lot of ways like this. There's quite a bit more to it. I've simplified it and compressed it for the purposes of presentation. But essentially, we have several different points that a developer like yourself can wire into. Now, those points allow you to do things like pre-validation, dealing with something before we write something to the data storage tier, and something that we allow you to access post the data storage tier. We can operate in transaction, and we can operate outside of transaction. We can also operate synchronously or asynchronously. Now, those are relatively large hammers. We make you make that decision today. Typically, I'd love to say to everybody in this room it needs to be an asynchronous operation, because that allows us to queue and manage it. But if you need to abort something because of a state that isn't right, you want to be in the synchronous pipeline and be able to abort that. There's a lot of rules that go around dealing with operating inside our transaction. Don't have a whole lot of time to go through that. And then we have a concept we refer to as database operation. The database operation is the main operation in our system. You cannot override that today unless you're implementing something we refer to as a virtual entity. It's essentially an equivalent to a connector, except it's an object that does not have a physical representation in the CDS infrastructure. It's a tabular object. For the future, you will see connectors and virtual entities come together as one thing. Okay? Moving on. All right. What we're going to do here is I'm going to walk through the use of webhooks, a service bus, and callbacks from logic apps and functions. Now, the question I typically get as I roll through these kinds of conversations is, when should I use what, and why should I use which piece for? CDS gives me a whole lot of functionality, a lot of capability. Why do I even need to go out? In a lot of scenarios, specifically when you're dealing with a complex workflow or complex process in the past, we have typically relied on you outsourcing that to something that is going to deal with complex workflow, complex engine. Our workflow engine that has been in CDS for the last number of years is, in a word, primitive. It was built around the .NET 4.5 workflow framework and really hasn't evolved. We're, of course, rectifying that by bringing Flow in to take its place, which is logic apps at the end of the day, is a wrapper on the logic apps infrastructure and substrate. And it will give us a lot more reason to not wander off into logic apps ourselves. The difference being, though, is that if you have a high-intensity operation, meaning you're doing a lot of things, you're doing a lot of connectors, you're doing a lot of loop-type operations that you want to take care of in a workflow, the Flow application itself is limited to the SKU that you've brought in and you purchased your seat under. In the case of a logic app can be brought in to offset that under your own Azure subscription and connected to the infrastructure. That way you can manage and scale it as you need it beyond the services that we provide you. Okay? So succinctly, the plan is, around most of our extensibility points is, we provide you the basic core functionality with a generic set of capacity. If you need to exceed that, we provide you the capability to tie into your own Azure subscriptions and pull those subscriptions assets into play for this to work. Okay? That's the general philosophy that we bring to our extensibility story. Now, webhooks. In the case of a webhook technology, by show of hands, who does not know what a webhook is? Awesome, cool. I don't want to have to explain it. I've had to explain it a couple of times. The webhook functionality is a call out. It is a fire and forget functionality in our system. It does not look at anything that comes back. So you cannot use a webhook in the case of a synchronous operation and actually return a result. You use it as a triggering mechanic only. Thus, whatever you webhook into, whatever you trigger, has to have the ability to call back if you need it to call back. In the case of our service bus capabilities, we support pretty much everything except Event Hub, the event router, the most recent event router capability. We support the ability to do relays, do standard queued service buses, non-queued service buses. We support event hubs. We support rest relays, that sort of thing. The capability set that you'd want to use in that regard really boils down to the scenario you're trying to use. If you're trying to, say, signal from online to on-prem, Service Bus provides that capability through a relay, at which point you can trigger something that is on the other side of a gateway should you choose to do that. Typically, though, the Service Bus feature set is used as a queuing mechanic for our system. So if you need to do a store and forward mechanic, I need to queue up a bunch of things, they need to execute in a specific order, and that order absolutely matters, then you'd use a queued service bus pumping them out to a remote system to make sure that the order of execution was correct. If you don't care about that, then you'd use Event Hub. Event Hub is faster and allows you to ship a bunch more data and farm that out to a lot of different places, but you don't have guaranteed order of delivery in those capabilities, okay? And then, of course, the callback feature sets that we provide. In the case of Logic Apps, we actually provide connectors from Logic Apps to get you back into CDS and interact back with the CDS environment. So let's actually look and play with it. Now, you guys are going to have to help me a bit here in the fact that I can't see the screen at the same time. So if it is too small, please do say something, and I will do what I can to support that. All right. Viewable? Did it come? All right. So we're going to have to work with that, I guess, at this point. So what I've got up on the screen here is a standard UI that I built up inside CDS. This is just using the unified interface. I've built up something that is going to show the interaction of the CDS system with an external data source. Now, in this case, the data source I'm using is from a gaming service. By show of hands, who's heard of Daybreak Entertainment? Sony Online Entertainment? Okay. World of Warcraft, those sorts of things. Most of those gaming services have actually APIs that you can consume and interact with. So my scenario here is I created the concept of being able to call out a particular guild, outfit, or group name, and then be able to pull its membership into the system so that I can view it and interact with it through an API. Now, typically, this isn't something that you would do through a plugin in the CDS infrastructure. Why? Depending on the size of this membership, so in this case, the wildcards have well over 1,000 members, and the amount of data, you have time limitations and performance limitations on how quickly that data will come back into CDS. Now, it's also sometimes, why would you want to store it in CDS when the actual authoritative data source is out there? Okay? So you just need it as a non or a volatile cache to be able to interact with it and work with it in the system. So in order to do that, I approached this problem 2 different ways. The first is I built a logic app to go and do all of the retrieval and all the interaction for me. I tied the system together using the create event of a record out to a logic app through a service bus, which in turn talks back and creates data into the system. So I'll go do that now. So in this case, I'm going to go create a record. And the key, the stimuli I give it is just the tag of the outfit. So I'm just going to save and close that. So I've created that record. And out here in the background, I have my logic app, which is sitting here waiting for something to happen. Now, that interaction, that act of creating the record here, ties into this service bus endpoint, and let me double click that, which is triggering based on the create, in this case, of an account. Now you notice in the UI it said outfit, it didn't say account. Everything in our UI and our visible display names is fungible. We can change those anytime we want, but the actual object names have to stay the same. Once they're established, they're always the same. So in this case, the record I hijacked to do this job was the account record. Now at this point, it should have shipped it off to Logic Apps. And Logic Apps should have been out there and running on that. Let's see, refresh, or did I disable it? Oh, there it is. So Logic Apps just picked it up and is starting to process it. So if I come back over here and click refresh, I've got the name and I've got the number of members. You also see there's an icon coming in. Now there was a pregnant pause there. There was a pause. Why is there a pause? The reason there's a pause there is that there is a polling sequence by which Logic Apps pick something up in, even off of a service bus. And then there is a time lag that it takes for a Logic app to boot up based on the subscription cost and how much you've invested in that. Now, if that lag is sufficient, if that's okay for you, that's great. If it's not, you have to think about breaking the problem down a little bit differently. In this case, I want the Logic app to actually do the execution and plumb in all of the actual 189 members. But the things that I care about right away are the name and the leader name. And I want to be able to see that right away in my infrastructure as part of the response. So how do you deal with that? In this case, this is where a function can be applied. So rather than going out and letting Logic Apps run through and do its job, which it will do over time, if I come back over here and click refresh, by now it actually should have caught up. There, it's actually caught up already. And if I come back over to the Logic app, it should be done. It doesn't take it very long to do it. In this case, it took just over a minute. I now want to change this around and actually use a function. So I'm going to clear this so we can actually watch the function work. I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to enable this webhook. Right now that webhook is disabled. So we're going to enable a webhook. Now all of the extensibility points in our system have the ability to be enabled and disabled. So I don't have to uninstall it or take it apart, I can just turn it off. And then I can turn it back on. It's administrative functions within our system. The tool I'm using is one of our admin tools. I also don't have to do it through this tool. I can actually do it through the web UI. Just this tool is a bit more convenient. So in this case, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come up here. I'm going to type in a different one. And I'm going to choose Save and Close. Now, at this point, glancing over here at the Logic app, or at the functions, and assuming that I didn't lose connection, which I probably did, it will wire back up to that function, and it will trigger the function. If I come back over here and refresh it, the function's got to wake up. That's what happens when I don't I did enable it. Double check that. Webhook, output, enabled. It is on create. It's up. There we go. Let's double check back here, refresh. And the webhook didn't pick up, so the webhook hasn't been enabled yet. The webhook will actually get enabled, and then you'll get the actual outfit leader and the population brought back into the system all at one shot. Now, from a code point of view, if I take a look at that and look at what that function is doing, and let's actually trigger it one more time, delete. Let's delete that and trigger this one more time. And we'll use this guy again. Save and close, come back over here to our functions area. And of course, this is what I get. Refresh. Double check to make sure he's actually enabled. It is enabled, and the function isn't going to run for me. So I apologize. Function is choosing not to execute at this point, but the rest of it does. So had the function actually executed, the code that it was running actually is this. So in this case, what it does is it reads the async post that comes from the system. When we actually post into a function, and I'll go take a look at what that is in a moment. I don't want to dig a whole lot of time on it right now. Normally in my regular sessions, if something like this happens, I debug it for you, so you can see actually how to resolve these problems. I don't have time to do that here. In this case, the post comes in and gives you the body of the plugin execution context. When we execute something into a plugin, our internal system has the entire payload of what was done and it handed to the plugin, at which point we manipulate that, give that to you in a set of objects in the system. When we're dealing with an external system, we give you that same data, except we post it into the body. In this case, we take it into the data object, and then we turn that into an object, JSON.NET object, at which point we start taking it apart using your standard JSON notation capabilities. This allows us to pull, just like you would in the plugin, the input parameters out of it, the key components out of it, and then begin processing information out. In this case, get data from remote is a component in the function that's talking to an external service, getting data back, again in JSON object format, parsing that response, and creating objects. You'll also see that I have strongly typed objects inside my function. In this case, I'm taking advantage of several of the capabilities of our developer suite to build not just an integration, but also leverage the strong type name system that we have in CDS, the generation system, that allows me to use dot notation to populate a lot of things from within my function. A couple of key important points. In this case, I happen to be using the XRM or CDS SDK to do this job. Okay? In using the CDS SDK is .NET Framework based. The functions runtime has two modes. It has the functions v1 mode and the functions v2 mode. Functions v2 does not work with .NET Function or .NET Framework. Functions v2 is .NET Standard and .NET Core only today. Okay? There are plans to add some more capabilities to it later from what they've been talking back to us about, but right now they are .NET Core and .NET Standard based. If you want to build functions that integrate with XRM and you want to use our APIs and our helpers, our SDK helpers to do that, you'll need to use a functions v1 runtime. That then allows you to do the NuGet includes to pull in our libraries, and I can show you what that looks like in this project by expanding the references over here, the dependencies over here in our project under NuGet. We have pulled in the core assembly and the AAD assembly and brought that into the environment. That allows us to do the strong typing, the interaction, the callbacks, all of that is brought with those assemblies into the experience. The actual strong type class here, the account object, was generated using a tool in our SDK called the CRM service util that allows us to generate a strong type object at that point in time. Now you're hearing me use 2 or 3 different terms, CRM, CDS, and XRM, okay? They all mean the same thing. At this point, we are in the middle of doing a name transformation to CDS for all of the core APIs. So the names will eventually all say CDS Service Util, CDS connector, and so on and so forth. Right now, the namespaces are split up between CRM, XRM, and CDS. Okay, we did that because those customers that we have a fairly significant customer base that has done a lot of extensibility. We didn't want to just break them one release to the next, so we're giving them that migration. Now, coming down and actually dealing with the update and establishing the connection was actually established using a call out in this hidden section, a call out to Key Vault, where we have a certificate-based connection string. So in Key Vault, we're reaching out, we're grabbing a certificate back, we're establishing a connection, we're using an application identity to call back into CDS. I'm not calling in as a named user. I'm actually calling in as an application user, using a service principal identity back into CDS, which in turn allows me to interact with a service as a user of the system. Okay? That user in turn, sorry, I gotta look at my clock. Oh, I'm running out of time. That user in turn also has permissions and capabilities just like any other user in our system, meaning you can create a service principal that has an extremely limited purview and scope within your system. You can say that this service principal has the ability to create records in the account, but cannot read them, cannot update them. Okay? Why would you want to do that? If you're thinking about just a general integration or external untrusted system trying to call into you, it gives you quite a bit of control to be able to deal with that and lock that down to the extent. Okay? So we're pretty much out of time. I apologize for running, I think I'm 5 minutes over or 10 minutes over. Sorry. As I said, I usually do this in about an hour and a half and compress it down to 20 minutes. If you have questions, I'll be around. Thanks for hanging out with me in the morning on Friday. Nobody got too wet last night. I understand it poured, but thank you.